Welcome everyone to Mighty Mustangs Making Moves. My name is Millicent Crisp. I'm your host for today, and we'll be talking with filmmaker extraordinaire, Mr. Pablo Miralles. And Pablo was also a graduate of John Muir High School, where we're filming in the John Muir High School studio, the home of the Mighty Mustangs. So welcome, Pablo.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. It's been quite a while to get you here, no fault of your own.
Oh, thanks.
But thank you so much for coming. So how does it feel to be back here on the campus? I know you spend a lot of time here anyway, but how does it feel to be here on the John Muir High School campus in its beautiful state-of-the-art studio?
Well, this is very impressive, I have to say. Yeah, I have been on and off this campus for the last 6 years making this film. But I do remember the first time you step on the campus after not being here for almost 30 years, and it is a very strange, surreal experience. I think that happens for most alumnus of high schools if they haven't been there for a while. Now, unfortunately, I may be a little too comfortable as I'm working with the Alumni Association here at the museum and volunteering for a lot of the school functions. But
you're curator of the museum, right?
I am, yeah.
That's awesome.
Well,
I've seen some of the things that you posted on Facebook, some of the archival footage from 65, 66, different things. Wonderful stuff, wonderful stuff. We may not be able to do it today, but next time if we can get you back, I'd love to show some of the footage that you found.
Sure.
If we can do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wonderful.
The two gentlemen who were the curators before I came on board, semi-reluctantly, they unfortunately both passed away. One was in the class of 52 and one was in the class of 56. And they were both very analog. They didn't really see the media that were in the storage rooms as being very valuable. They
weren't filmmakers, clearly.
They weren't, no. One, Lauren, was a longtime art teacher here at the school, though. So all the work that was done in the museum is amazing, but it's very handmade. So I didn't know if we were going to talk about this, but I'm in the process of doing a major renovation of it and bringing it up to the 21st century and putting in more audiovisual displays and exhibits, and more exhibits that are actually like the dresses of the cheerleaders from 1955.
Oh, I love that.
The cheerleaders of 66, the cheerleaders of 85. So I'm going around getting donations from a lot of different people to give a more hands-on feel to the museum. It's going to be an ongoing process. Ideally we'd be done in about 3 years, but it could take a little longer just because of the funds necessary. But we're very lucky here at Muir to have a museum. There's not many high schools that do. So I really feel like it deserves, the prestige that this institution, has earned. I guess it's deserved a museum, John Muir High School. And so
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
you are a product of the Pasadena Unified School District.
I am. Yeah, from
Tell me.
Second grade.
Okay.
I moved up here in West Altadena, 71, the year after busing, went to my local elementary school.
Which was?
Franklin.
Oh, okay.
Which unfortunately might be closing pretty soon, which would be very sad for me. And then I got bused across to almost Sierra Madre to Field Elementary, which was, I think a great experience in the sense that you got to see how the other half lived. I mean, I grew up in a very middle-class African-American neighborhood. We were the only non-black family on the street. So I was on a black bus, sent all the way, 25 minutes.
How was that for you?
I loved it. I mean, I guess how do I say this? I came from a family of 7 kids. So there were 7 graduates of Muir from my family. And so there was always somebody, a sibling on that bus with me, whether I was getting sent to field or no, I wouldn't say I was being protected. I may have been protecting one of them on occasion. I was very sociable. I had a lot of friends. I was playing football and stickball on the streets.
Okay.
But a lot of my brothers and sisters didn't always do that, especially the older ones who found, I think, the transition a little more difficult from Eagle Rock. But I thought just being with my friends for those 30 minutes to 40 minutes, depending on traffic, every morning, every afternoon, it was really bonding. A lot of those people I'm still very close with, and you know, I always did my homework on the bus, so by the time I got home, I was done and could just play. I didn't see busing as an inconvenience. I just saw it as a part of growing up.
Where'd you go after field?
After field, I went to McKinley.
Oh, you went to McKinley.
I went to McKinley.
Okay.
I was the last graduating class of McKinley Junior High. I mean, after us, really, they couldn't continue.
I know,
yeah,
huh?
Right.
I mean, it was over then, baby.
It was over. No, and then off to Muir, which was my home school. So I walked down Casitas, or biked when I had a bike finally. And I, you know, it's kind of funny. I tell people, I never saw high school as like this amazing experience. Like I did look back and say, wow, it's pretty amazing. I did 4 years of stage crew. I played 4 years of soccer. I had a year of playing football at a school where football was everything, although I was a kicker. But the experience you get at Muir was important, not while you're doing it. It's always after, when you go out into the, quote, real world and you say, wow, I was really living in a bubble and I had no idea.
Yeah, we were very fortunate.
Yes.
And didn't know it.
No.
But looking back, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and this film project that I'm working on is basically an homage to that, and specifically to one person, this Cameron Turner, class of 1981, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. And I was working on another documentary about my real other passion, which is soccer, and he had written on his Facebook page that we were lucky to go to school in Pasadena in the 1970s. And I was, you know, I had to say I was bemused and befuddled because I'd never thought of my own educational experiences being anything unique.
So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
You know, let's get into the film in a little bit.
Okay.
At Muir, based on what Cameron was sharing, were there any, I know that when we had coffee, you mentioned that there were influential teachers and different teachers that had certain effects on your life.
Right.
But there were a couple that you mentioned that were teachers, but they weren't your teachers.
Right.
But they greatly influenced and impacted you. Who were they and why?
Well, the one that comes out, and it's interesting, I've actually gotten to know him since, is Mr. Barnes. He was sort of like, he had been a student at the school. He was the ski club president. I wasn't in the ski club, but he's one of these guys that you would see sort of leading the students when there were issues, you know, and he was fully engaged with the students. It's funny because now I don't know if another one doesn't quickly pop into my head. So if I said more than one,
no, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
So what was it? So he impressed or impacted you due to his leadership ability, or did you interact with him on some level?
Actually, I think it was more of a passive on my side. I was just observing. He had this room that was completely painted with cartoons and social, like the what is it? The environmental flag with the green with the stripes that was all the rage in the early 70s. No, it was for like the ecology flag.
Oh, the ecology flag.
Yeah, and it was on the ceiling, for example.
I just remember the La Raza painted, which was powerful over the door.
That's right. That's right. And so this idea that these populations of the school who may not generally have, you aren't going to be found in your textbook. They're your stories, so to speak. There seemed to be a home for those stories with him, and he was recognizing those. Anyway, and to me, he was what Muir was all about, right? Even though he was a white male, he seemed to really try to get to know all the students on a personal level.
That's awesome.
And I had a lot of influential teachers here, and I'd say the one that influenced me the most in terms of how I went about my life afterwards was Mr. Navarro.
I remember Mr. Navarro.
Who was my philosophy teacher.
Yeah.
He also, unfortunately, just recently passed away, but I did get a chance to interview him. And when I think about my ability to do critical thinking and question what I hold to be true, it all comes back to those days in his class where he would basically make you stand up and try to defend whatever it was that you believed, and he would take devil's advocacy, even though he might also agree with you. He would make you really have to question it and defend it.
That's what makes you such a good filmmaker. You know what? Let's pause right there because we have a PSA. You know what a PSA is, right?
I do know what a PSA is.
So why don't you tell our listening audience what a PSA is?
A public service announcement?
Perfect.
There it is.
There we go. Public service announcement. Okay.
All right.
Howdy, Pablo. It's good to see you again. Millie and I are sitting here talking about you, and she wants me to identify myself. Bob Barnes, you know who I am. Muir teacher, graduate of Muir, 56, teacher from 70 to 93, proud Mustang. I really admire the fact that you took the time and the energy and the expertise and the funding, the creativity to make this film. It was, I'm sure, an arduous process. It showed your dedication to Muir, and I think too often those of us who either graduate from Muir or graduate from teaching at Muir go on with our lives and perhaps forget about Muir. You didn't. You knew what an important experience it was, and how the Muir experience enriched the lives of virtually all students and teachers who were part of that experience. So thank you, Pablo, for taking the time and the energy and again the expertise to bring that experience to life.
I feel like that old TV show, This Is Your Life. Nobody is going to be old enough to remember that, except for him, of course. But anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the public service announcement, it's really, the PSA is a Pablo surprise announcement.
Wow. Yes, that was a Pablo surprise announcement.
I wanted to do that.
Wow.
Because I'll never forget when I first met you, and you were so thoughtful and gracious. And I thought, typically, actors or whatever, and people in front of the cameras are the ones that get all the accolades. Filmmakers more so these days, but you know, documentarians and that sort of thing. A lot of times it's their subject matter or whatever. But you know, I just felt that you needed to be celebrated because you've done such an amazing work, really.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't mean to embarrass you,
That's
but
all right.
but I really felt that way. So cool. So that was high school. Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Great.
Yeah, that was great.
That was really great. So let's talk about, you weren't involved in filmmaking when you were here at Muir.
No.
That didn't happen until you were in college.
That's right. The very end of undergraduate, actually, and totally by accident.
Tell us that story.
Well, I think I went to college, a small state school in Northern California, for two primary reasons. One, I really felt I could play on their soccer team because they were Division III, and two, to get pretty far away from my family in LA. And it suited that purpose very well. I think the population of full-time students was about the same as Muir, even though it was a state school, state university at the time up in Sonoma. I wasn't very focused on what I wanted to do. I had a lot of passions. I continued to do theater, stage crew stuff there. I did a liberal arts program that allowed me, interdisciplinary, it allowed me to do a lot of different things and not have to declare a major until after my sophomore year. And it ended up that across from my dorm was the radio station, and I started to do DJing just for fun, and then I got on the student newspaper, which I'd kind of done as in McKinley, but I didn't do it at Muir, too many other things to do. And I really enjoyed that, and I did advertising. Became the advertising manager, so I actually made money, which was crazy.
Wow.
At the time. And then I had to actually pick a major, and I was getting to my senior year, and I was like, wow, I'm not going to graduate in 4 years, until the head of the communications department, this guy, Carl Jensen, said, no, actually, you've been working on the newspaper, you've been working on the radio, and you're doing stage. That all can be credited towards a communications degree. You'll get out of here on time. But you have to do a couple extra projects. And one of the professors said, well, Panasonic gave us this video camera and an editing deck. Nobody's using it. If you make something, I'll give you 4 units. And okay, I'll do that. And so I literally did what everyone was doing in the mid '80s. I did a music video, and a friend's band gave me the music, and I ran around Sonoma County videotaping crazy things and edited it together and thought nothing of it. And I graduated, and when I took an off year before I decided what I was going to maybe go into advertising, maybe go into public relations, that kind of thing. And while I was in South America, I got a call that my teacher had submitted it to the Bay Area Guardian Student Filmmakers Award, and it won something. And he said, I encourage you to apply to a film school. And I was like, okay. How about UCLA? Chances over 1 in 100. There's no chance. And I got in. So the next thing I know, I'm a filmmaker, but it came very late indeed. It was never a passion of mine to be a filmmaker. I think it was always sort of a passion to be a storyteller. And I always dabbled in short stories and poetry. But the idea of being a filmmaker, and I took to it. I think a lot of it was my experience in stage crew at Muir, the idea that you could just out of nothing build a set and create the lighting and make sure the sound is right. And, I think my true strength is in producing. If I can visualize it, I can make it happen. I can find the people, I can create the time, I can, put it all together. I can put things together quite well.
But you write and you direct, but you find that your major skill set might be producing?
Well, I think that the thing that I'm most marketable for, I've always been, I produce things for people. That's my main job and has been since I got out of UCLA. So it's what someone can point to and say, he can do that. When you try to be creative, when you write or do you direct or you make your own films, you have to convince other people that that's worth spending money on. Like they're going to give you money. And I'm not so good at asking people, a corporation, for example, that my idea is so brilliant that they're going to want to spend millions of dollars on it. And so I think one of the things I've been trying to do over the last 8 years with my Arroyo Seco films is to create a body of work that speaks for my abilities so that I won't have to try to sell myself in that way anymore. It's not easy. You find in the independent film world, most of the people that are actually making films are either independently wealthy or related to people that are independently wealthy. It's not something for poor people. Have a hard time making films. You have to show first that you're capable. That's one of the reasons people go to film school. You look at like a Ryan Coogler. If he didn't go to USC and make those films, it's very unlikely he would ever had a chance to make Black Panther.
Yeah. And Creed 2.
And Creed 2.
Yeah.
And Creed 1.
So,
yeah.
Though you may have stumbled into it,
Yes.
it developed into a passion
Yes.
for you, because I clearly you're gifted at it. That doesn't mean you have to love it, but I think it's awesome that you are passionate about it. I mean, my goodness, everything that you've done, you've won some kind of an award for it, whether it be an Academy Award-winning short, Visas and Virtue.
Well, I was only on the production team for that, so I didn't direct that. So.
There's an Emmy-nominated short that you were co-producer.
I was a co-producer on that.
And I got to see The Hammer.
Yes.
Oh, the one that really moved me, Possession.
Oh yeah, my thesis film, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Woo.
Well, thank you.
Wow.
I know that didn't screen very many places, so.
I like how you said, God, I'd like to get my hands on that and do some editing.
I would love
because
to
it was
edit that
I
down.
couldn't wait to get to the next. Like, whoa, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But it did have like a redeeming quality to it, which was hopeful for me, because I was afraid you're going to set the black guy up, and I was like, please don't do that, please don't do that. So, but it was a great work, and I really kudos for for your effort, and the film. Can we all get along?
Yes.
That's your, I guess they would say, like your seminal passionate.
Yes, this is my
all
latest.
Get along.
My latest.
The
film.
latest piece.
Yeah.
And I like what you said about it. You said it's a film for anyone who believes that diversity and excellence are important elements to good public education.
Yes.
It's that and a lot more. It's that and a lot more. I mean, especially as we look around in the world today. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think every school that's struggling with that needs to see it, because I don't think everybody is doing everything out of malice. I think some of it is just so narrow-minded and tunnel vision, and they want the best for their kids, as I'm sure you do.
Right.
But
That's
you know
important.
what? It's certainly not in taking them out of public schools and leaving it as
A secondary.
secondary,
Or
yeah.
the stratified education system that we have these days in public schools, where people are vying to be in that better school, that better magnet, that better charter, and not really caring about the students that they leave in that other school, those students that don't have maybe the financial privilege that you do to have a choice, that they can't travel halfway across the town to go to a better school. So yeah, I mean, ideally I would love for in the same way that we could get behind something as semi-damaging as Can We All, No Child Left Behind, if we could just say No School Left Behind, and that we actually put the same amount of effort and money that we do to have the best military in the world. What if we did that for our public schools? What if we didn't have a bad school and a good school? What if they were all just good schools? And it
it was when we were going to school.
there was a time.
Muir was a great school.
It
Not
was a
that
very
it-
small
yeah.
window, though, that happened, because there was a reason busing happened. And on the west side of Pasadena, the majority schools centered around Washington Junior High were underserved. They didn't have the budgets of the newer Wilson Junior High, for example, or McKinley, which was the traditional, and Elliott definitely. At one point, when Bob Barnes went to Elliott in the late 40s, early
60s,
50s, it was all white, including an all-white cooking staff and an all-white janitorial staff. And it's kind of weird for people of my generation who think of Elliott as almost a minority school, but it wasn't always that way.
Yeah.
And so busing in Pasadena broke down that barrier that was personified by Lake Avenue, like black families primarily, because in the 60s especially, this issue was always seen as a black and white issue. And Pasadena, that made sense because it was such a large population. But, white families, didn't allow, or I shouldn't say, let me flip it around. Real estate agents and bankers didn't give loans.
Redlining.
Right,
Yeah.
redlining. And busing made that unnecessary. And when I spoke to Jim Spangler, who was the plaintiff, and Al Lowe, who had been the president of the school board at the time, and they said that it was very messy. There were a lot of things that didn't go as well as they'd like, but the best thing that happened is black families started moving on that side of Lake, and it was okay. It's like it didn't matter anymore. So
I think it's powerful, though, that you were able to capture that in your film, Can We All Get Along? And I remember, I didn't know you that well, other than I really had thought that you were a very thoughtful, considerate filmmaker. You just struck me in a very profound way, for lack of a better way of being able to put that. And I remember you were doing, speaking of financing, that you were doing a fundraising for the movie. I hadn't gotten involved with it yet, with the film, but I was kind of like, rooting for you, like what's going on. And I remember, I don't know when it was, maybe it was a year ago. It wasn't this last time, but the time before, you had like an hour or something, a lunch break before you were supposed to bring closure on the financing. And then it came in the last minute. What was that like?
Well, I mean, that's the nature of independent film, I guess, on some level. I feel very blessed that I wanted to do a film about a community that wanted to support a film about the community. It's not something that a lot of people have and find, I guess. So that made the scope of the movie potentially larger and more than anything. And that was really important because when I started this process, I actually had a much different film in mind. The title of the film was Can We All Get Along? Stories of Integration from John Muir High School, because my discovery of the film or the story was that we had an integrated school that had been integrated since it had been opened in the 1920s. It had it is part of the blood of John Muir High School, that it is a place that's welcoming and people can come here and find opportunity and become world leaders, regardless of your race or your socioeconomic beginnings.
Yeah.
And that is something that I don't find in a lot of public schools today. I really feel like there are schools that they don't expect much of those children, and they don't have the opportunity to see people who come from different parts of their own city. They can't, and I think study after study shows that a diverse student body helps the people who already have the privilege and help the people who don't have the privilege.
I agree.
And so,
I agree.
so I was so excited about like discovering that I came from this school, that I wanted to do about the history of the school, and I wanted to find out how all the movements that led to the school being the way it was when I was there, and then what has happened since. That was like my whole idea.
Well, obviously, so many people, it resonated across, the spectrum, because people clearly rallied. I mean, I'm not even you, and it brought tears to my eyes when you were like, "We got it." I was like, great.
No,
You know what?
it was great.
I was just informed. We got another PSA.
Oh, another PSA.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Another public service announcement.
All right. I have a feeling it's not really a public service announcement. I'll watch it though.
Okay.
My name is Molly Munger, and I am a very recently retired civil rights lawyer. I went to John Muir High School. Yes, it changed my life. Pablo Miralles is a wonderful person. He made the most fascinating movie about John Muir High School and the times that surrounded us when we were at John Muir High School, about how John Muir was a focus of a moment of great hope, some conflict, evolution towards a more just society. And he showed me some parts of that movie at one point, and I think I might have been interviewed for the movie. And it's just hard not to get fond of Pablo Miralles after that. I think the movie that Pablo made struck a chord with a lot of people outside the Pasadena community because it represented a moment of hope and change that was widely shared throughout America. And like so many things, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, 2 steps forward again. And when we're in a backward moving moment, and we've sadly been in quite a few of them, on racial justice, I think people take heart from remembering times when things were better, people were more committed, and the real forward feeling was there. I wanted to support the movie when I saw the variety of voices that Pablo had captured in the movie. It was that wide variety of people that had come together, all talking about their feelings and hopes, that was so moving to me. That's the way I remember the time as well, a very unifying time. I'm very grateful to Pablo, who's of course much, much younger than I am and wasn't there at all during that period, for coming along as a young man and saying, this was important. I wasn't there, but I can see that it's important. Everybody thinks what they lived through is important. But when some younger people come along and say, no, it really was important, it feels very good.
Always nice to be considered a younger person,
You are, baby.
Oh. Anyway.
You are.
She was very sweet. I mean, yes, she's the one who came through. She's my angel funder. I think every independent film has one. And I really enjoyed meeting her, interviewing her. She's still in the movie. You're still in the movie.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and I love her story. I love how she, purposely left Westridge and felt that private school experience wasn't, the experience that she wanted, and how that her experience at Muir colored everything that happened afterwards, and how she learned to understand other people's struggles by going to school with people that were different than herself. And to me, that's the story of John Muir High School. And I really hope that it becomes John Muir's story again. I think we have a really great administration here with Lawton Gray.
We do.
Class of '93, who recognizes the strengths of that and sees that when you have a school that doesn't truly reflect the population of its community, that is not good for either the community or the students, and that he's working very hard to get those people that say they want to be a part of Pasadena and Altadena and Sierra Madre, although I doubt Sierra Madre is going to come all the way out to Muir, but they are part of the Pasadena Unified School District, that there is strength in this diversity. And if you go down the hallway here in the A building and you look at the photos, which you're included, of the people that have made a mark on their careers, and you recognize that there's not another school, definitely not within 20 miles of here, that has that kind of impactful alumni. And there's a reason, in my opinion, and I try to just find it in the film, Yeah.
So, this film you've been working on?
It's the 6th year, yeah.
I think that's powerful. So you found like a passion, a purpose in this.
Yes, and I think that's part of the reason I started Arroyo Seco Films. I was kind of tired of working on people's projects that were really only about what kind of money you could get out of it, and that there was nothing that was going to be said in that film that hasn't been said somewhere at another time by another person. So my first film, Gringos at the Gate, took this whole social, political look at a soccer rivalry, U.S. versus Mexico, and how it affects the people on that side of the border, this side of the border, and the huge population of Mexican Americans. And the fact that nobody else had done that made it worth my 5 years of working on that film. And this film is the same way. It's just like I could keep making this film. That's one of the things that was really hard, because every day something happens on this campus that changes a little bit the arc of the story. So, but after I made that first film, then I made this one, which is this. Now the title is The Segregation of John Muir High School. And after I made the first film, it became very obvious that the true important message of the film wasn't how great the school was. It's how the school no longer represents what that school was, and why. What were the social, political forces that made the white middle class primarily, but also middle class of all races, leave public schools in general, Muir specifically, and what would it take? And I think a lot of my friends from film school were very helpful. Watched that first cut and said, you were there, Pablo. You're very passionate about this. Where is your voice? Why? And one friend of mine, Grace Lee, who's a very well-known filmmaker, said, I have a son your age. I'm trying to decide where to send him to school. It's difficult because we're looking for schools like we knew and we can't find them. And she said that should be part of your story too. And actually that was when this new version of the film really, when it became personal, then I think it really came alive.
So would you say, I'm sorry, I didn't
Yeah,
mean to cut you off.
I'm sorry.
So would you say finding your passion has to do with something being really personal?
No, I don't think it has to be personal, but I feel it has to be something that I guess the arc of justice bends. If you're not pushing it in that the progressive, if you're resisting it, I don't want to hear those stories. I want to hear stories about people that are trying to push the discussion towards our ideals as I imagine them. I've talked to a lot of people who have seen some of my cuts and said, well, it wasn't really the Muir I knew. And I said, well, you're welcome to make your own film. But this is how I see it. This is my vision of how the importance of my education and what I want from my son, and in the end, what I want from my country. And if I can't say that and feel really passionate that I'm on that course, then I'm not that interested. So it's more than just my personal, it's also my sense of, the justice in general for our country, our community, and everything.
I like that. Let me ask you a question. If there was a young filmmaker or an older filmmaker, doesn't matter, storyteller, sitting here listening to you and wondering, how, Pablo's found his niche, he's found his purpose. What would you say to them that may encourage them to be able to grab a hold of something and to be able to run with it like you have?
You know, when I have talked to students, especially like here at Muir in the Arts and Entertainment Academy, I tell them the most important skill you're going to have is writing. The camera technology will change, the editing technology will change, but the idea of crafting a story, creating a narrative, that doesn't change. And it doesn't cost anything. It's a pencil and paper. So if you have an idea, I mean, it all starts with an idea. And you won't know if it's a good idea or not until you start working it. And you have to write it, rewrite it, and test it with people, give it to people that you trust. And when it feels like it's something that you can visualize the entire thing, like you can actually see the opening frame to the end credits, and you know why every image is in there, then it's time to start thinking, well, what do I need? I need a cameraman, I need an actor, I need the elements. Because it's a beautiful thing, filmmaking and television, because they're collaborative arts. You can't do it on your own. There are people that do cinema verite and run around with a camera. It's a different element to the art than I'm used to. I'm used to working with people, and I'm an extrovert. I really love working with people. I'm going to have a gathering this holiday with my original cameraman from 6 years ago, and the sound guy, and the editor, and my story editor, and the composer now who's on board, because I'm always giving thanks that they saw what I wanted to do and were willing to, on my limited budget, help me make that possible. So
You should have them come here to the studio and talk to them about the movie.
well, let's see. Once it premieres, and we'll see how it goes, then I'm sure we could do a follow-up. How about
It's
that?
going to be great. Yes, I'll hold you to that, because I
right.
already know that it's going to be great.
Well, knock
It's
on-
resonating, powerfully within the Pasadena, San Gabriel Valley, but even across borders, like when I would have introduced you to the woman that was with me, but that was Molly Munger's sister-in-law.
Oh.
And I didn't want you to know her
Wow.
until after the interview.
Okay.
So said she was going to swing by. Hopefully you get to meet her formally
That would
today.
be nice.
Because she's coming from a distance. But in any event, she didn't grow up in the Pasadena community and all of that, and she really got it. She really got it, what you were trying to convey. And it's going to make people question a few things. The voucher system, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I think Muir's really hanging in there. And, to all my PHS family that's here today, I love y'all. I am wearing red glasses and red shoes and a red belt.
Couldn't help but notice.
On game day, as PEP commissioner, there's no way I would have worn red, because they would say, take off that red, whatever. But I let them know that I was showing them love today,
That's very
because they were here to support a fellow Mustang.
No, and I have several friends who I'd grown up with because during busing, who actually would have gone to Muir but ended up going to PHS, who have been very supportive of this project because they recognize it both from their own family who had gone here before,
Sure.
or just the idea of just how different their experience would have been had they come here, which was interesting as well. And not to say it would have been better or worse, but it was just definitely different. Those kind of differences are, I think, much more have kind of washed away with the open enrollment and anybody being able to go anywhere. And I actually told somebody, well, if my son had a specific desire for a program that was at PHS versus something that was at Muir, and I'd say, as long as it was a public school, I think I'd be okay.
And all those Mustangs we would just, after the committee met, we would just want to know that.
Well,
No,
it's
I'm
interesting.
just teasing you.
No, it's interesting because one of the struggles that I've had in the last year and a half with the final edit was to make sure that this film wasn't just a Pasadena story. The first version was definitely not even a Pasadena story. It was a West Pasadena story. And a lot of the people I screened it for, I lived for a little while over in China during the editing, and I would show it to them and they would say, oh, that's sort of like a school I knew in X city or Y city. And that kind of bothered me because it was like, yeah, I know there's integrated schools, but the message I felt had to be more than just, it's like a school I know. It has to be, why aren't our schools everywhere?
Like this.
That's right. So to make the film more national in scope was a real challenge. And I think I finally, with the help of my editor, Clark Harris, who was he's an East Coast guy, and he was very helpful in that.
He was at the screening at the Altadena Library, right?
Correct.
I'm just thrilled because clearly you have some major fans, and I guess you know that on a certain level, but when you're struggling to put together monies and this and that, and you've got a family, you've got a lovely wife and an adorable son, sometimes the creative person can kind of, feel a little neglected or wounded or whatever because, you're the head of the head of the household. I'm single head of house. But
No,
you're head of the household.
I was very lucky. I've been super support from my wife who, when I met her was an unemployed UC Berkeley grad in software, but found her passion later in life and is doing very well for herself financially, which has allowed me a lot more. We're not super wealthy, so she can't fund my movies, but she will allow me to take fewer side gigs, in order to finish these things that are important to me. And I am very lucky to have an adorable son who, is also very supportive of me, although he doesn't still quite understand what it is I do.
He's a very talented salesman.
Yes, he is.
Yes, he's there in your corner. Had to make sure I had a T-shirt.
He's more materialistic than I am. I have to say that he cares a lot more about the dollars right now.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I find it fascinating actually because I don't know, it's fun. It's fun to see.
So out of curiosity, when you approach a project, did you do budgeting for this, or you just did what?
No, it was budgeted, and like I said, there were two. Actually, I consider it almost two films. The first film I budgeted, $30,000, which for a feature film is pretty small. I raised it. I got 35 on my first go round of funding, and I made that film on budget. Feel like I'm a pretty strong producer. Then when I decided that maybe there was more to this story and I was going to have to go back and do more interviews and definitely spend more time doing archival footage and doing more research and maybe having to buy some footage from TV networks. The most expensive thing in this film right now is the rights to use these newscasts. But I feel like they really add to the story.
They do.
And so it's kind of funny to think that your most expensive, and this happened actually with my Gringos film too, the footage of the games that we wanted to insert into the interviews that showed the storyline ended up being by far the most expensive aspects of the film. I've managed to not have it that bad for this, but still it is, it's one of those things you can't help. People own stuff and they don't want to give it away for free. So, forgot the original question, but
no, you've definitely answered the question.
And then Molly came and saved me for able to actually make my second version. So, yeah, that was awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, at least the size I wanted. I may have had to have scaled it down. There was a time when I was already looking at the budget and going, okay, I guess I'm not going to have to be able to do this, not going to be able to do that. And because I always believe in finishing what I start, so it may not have been the scope, but I would have finished.
So we have a few minutes before we wrap up here. Let me ask you a question. And you probably get it all the time, so forgive me if it's redundant. I know that this is a major project because you devoted, years of your life into it and you're just about at that place. Are you keenly focused on that, or are you also looking at your next project?
Oh, I'm always looking at a next project. I have in my office on a big whiteboard are 3 in development ideas. And then I've got some smaller ones that if those big projects don't happen, I don't stop. So there is a project I'm actually going to be working with the Altadena Heritage. It's going to be Michelle Zach's group is going to. I've made a PSA for them. See, I do know PSAs. I make them about the Owens Brown grave site, and they got the funding for it. So part of the funding will go to a documentary which will explain that to the whole community and how important it is. So I'll be doing that in 2019.
Awesome.
And
do you
then,
need any intern help, I'm there, somebody to hold your, your glasses or something, I'm happy to help.
You're far over too qualified for that. But
That's
if
good.
there is something, I would be happy to. Well, as soon as we know where and when we start, then it'd be great to get you involved. Maybe. I don't want to say anything on camera. So
No,
because
I'm
then
not
you'll
gonna
hold me to it.
I know, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that to you.
And then I've got this web series idea that I'm working with a young recent graduate of the USC Film School, who when I was in China, I wrote a lot of stories about life in China as seen from the expat's point of view. I did a lot of personal study of the current and historical changes that have happened in that country, which are crazy compared to most in the world. I mean, 500 million people came out of poverty within my lifetime. It's just kind of like a bizarre thing to think about. And there are good parts and bad parts of that transition.
Sure.
And so this young student who's going to be quite an amazing filmmaker, her film that she just finished is going to do well. She had a really interesting take on the Chinese foreign student life. And so she basically pitched it to me to see if I would help produce it. And I said, I would love to. So we're in the process of writing those. And then I've got some big feature ideas I've had since film school that I've keep, turning
Mulling
over.
over?
Yeah, you never know. Somebody might offer me a couple $1 million and I can do it. But, meantime, I keep doing
We'll
it.
have to discuss that.
Okay.
That's very interesting. So, if wishes were fishes, would you like to just focus on docs?
Oh, no.
Okay, okay.
No, I fell into docs. Basically, took a lot of meetings to try, to move my feature projects forward, fiction, and realized that since I hadn't had any body of work since my student filmmaker years, and producing other people's work isn't the same thing as being on the creative side, I needed to make something to show, and that's where Gringos came from.
Mm-hmm.
And we made that low budget, and it did very well. But once I started making stuff again, and I saw how relatively easy it is to do documentaries in terms of the production side, it's incredibly hard on the editorial side. I mean, it's where the film is made. And but then the Muir project came along, and I just felt like I want to do this. I want to do this, and I want to do it now, kind of thing. So I think documentaries, but my passion, I think, if I had a passion in filmmaking, is to do an epic story on the screen, and I will continue to push towards that. It may or may never happen, but it's what I would like to do. So
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today. But on that note, that will be my prayer for you.
thank you.
That you go ahead, that the money's there, the favor's there, the people like Molly and others, Bob Barnes, are there to just cheer you on. So thank you.
Oh, thank
You're
you, Millie.
awesome.
No,
I
you're
appreciate
awesome. Thank
coming
you.
here so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right. Bless you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks. I thought that was really well done.